Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is great to talk with you again. We had some days that we were unable to do any streams or uploads. The power was down in Pretoria constantly for the past few days, especially in the area where I live. And also, it rained the whole time. So even though I do have a solar system, I was not able to generate enough electricity. Luckily, even though the power is still down right now as we speak, one of our generous viewers gave me a generator, and this is why I am able to do this amazing stream tonight with Mr. Rory Duncan. Rory Duncan was born in 1966 in Rhodesia, while Mr. Ian Douglas Smith was still Prime Minister of this country. And we are going to speak about all of his experiences being born in Rhodesia, growing up in Rhodesia, then as a young man, the transition to Zimbabwe, and all the incredible stories that he had. Mr. Duncan was one of the people as a young man who stood up against Robert Mugabe's regime when they were invading land and committing grievous human rights abuses. And for this, Mr. Duncan was actually locked up in prison and he spent some time in a Zimbabwe prison. But all of that will be happening in this video, and I'm very happy to greet Mr. Rory Duncan. How are you, sir?
Philip, good evening. Nice to see you. Thank you for having me, man. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. Just trying to get that glare off my glasses. I don't think that can happen. Let me just adjust here. No, no, no. Well, there you go. You're gonna have to.
It's
There you
fine.
go.
Don't worry too much about it. So
Good.
let's do this interview in a chronological fashion, and we'll talk about your childhood, and then what happened when Mugabe took over, and we'll just go on as the story progresses. So let's begin with the Rhodesia that you remember from your childhood, as you were born under the prime ministership of Mr. Ian Smith. How was it
Yeah.
then, and so on?
Well, my early childhood was just a dream. It was fantastic. Rhodesia at that time was still very new. It was exactly 76 years old, and it lasted a total of 90 years from inception. The first trekkers that went up by ox wagon, including my great great grandfather, and so it was an ideal, fantastic place to grow up as a young boy, wild, free, uh, peaceful, and abundant. It was a safe and beautiful place to be as a kid. There was almost no crime in those days anywhere, be it in the townships or the rural areas or on the farms. So yeah, it was just an absolute pleasure being a kid in Rhodesia. Barefoot
What did
and
your
fancy
father
free.
do?
Willem, my dad was a preacher of all things. He was a Christian preacher for the Assemblies of God, which was an English-based, I don't know, think maybe a British church that had churches all across Africa. And so he was a preacher in the Assemblies of God, and then later on became an independent sort of Pentecostal preacher with his own church and lots of singing and dancing and drums and things when the church modernized in the 80s.
Was he a missionary for the black folks in Rhodesia, or was his church mainly focused on white people?
In those days, it was mostly white folks because the church was a suburban church in what was, in those days, pretty much a whites only neighborhood. But there was a hell of a lot of outreach into the black areas and a black sort of division to the church. We had a guy called Fred Timby, as I recall. He was a co pastor. So, yeah, it was really quite an open society in that way. It didn't have the same kind of hard racial lines that the apartheid South African government imposed on the country. So it was a much more open and fluid society than South Africa. So, we were commonly mixing with black folks on a
Hmm.
relatively regular basis.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about your childhood. Let's shift a bit. So I think your entire childhood, Rhodesia had been fighting the Bush War. But when did things start to heat up to the point where you could sense that things are changing in Rhodesia, and Ian Smith is not going to hold on to power much longer? When did you start realizing this?
Sure, Willem. I first was given an Uzi 9 millimeter at the age of 11. So that would have been 1977. And we were training in almost military, well, actual military style camps as kids, as our summer holidays, if you like. And we went through everything from, well, a whole sort of militarized camp experience. We did weapons training, and even at school, we had to do, exercises in case we were rocketed or mortared at school. Run, get under the best. So we had bomb practices and things like that. Um, in the mid 70s onwards, I would say, we had to travel everywhere outside of the city in military convoys, and those were serious affairs. You'd have to,
Mm.
um, you know, congregate at a collection point on the outskirts of the city, and then file into a military escort, which would have machine gunners, armored cars, troop carriers, civilian vehicles, and so on and so forth, all the way through. And in certain areas, even a helicopter gunship trailing or shadowing the convoy. So it was the mid 70s that we realized, wow, and things are getting tough. But there was actually no concept in the Rhodesian mind that the war would end in liberation, so to speak, and the revolutionary
Mm.
sense.
So, was there ever a terrorist attack by ZANU PF on you or close to you when you were still a child?
Absolutely, yes. All over the place. It wasn't a day that went past that there wasn't an attack of some sort. So it was either my uncle on patrol as a tracker for the special forces, and in that day, his partner is shot to death in a contact, or it's a cousin who's in a landmine while on operations, or it's attack on a mission station or a village nearby, or a landmine on one of the farm roads, or a all points bulletin on the farmers radio network to say, the terrorists are in the area, please be extra vigilant. At our farm in Tengwe Karoi, which is in West Zimbabwe, um, we had a stick of Patu, which is like a police anti-terrorist unit, guys of four, who built a sandbagged machine gun nest in our garage with an MAG, 7.62 machine gun, and they were there every night of every week of every year until the end of the war. So it was very apparent. It was very, very close. A small country with a very tight knit community of people. So we felt it at all times, the ever present danger and the sorrow of bloodletting and the loss of life, whether it were your direct family or friends, but it was always there.
Tell me, Rory, so when Mugabe took over Rhodesia and it became Zimbabwe, you were a teenager. Something I always wondered about was there also this same sense of euphoria and hope and, rainbow nation like idea that was floating around in Rhodesia at that time, as we had here in South Africa with Nelson Mandela, where all the white people thought, okay, everything's going to be great, everything's going to be fine, we're still going to be able to flourish in this country, and so on and so forth, before, the truth really hit everyone, and Mugabe started with all the invasions and killings and gross human rights abuses.
Uh, Good question. Um, it was 1980, so 14 years before Mandela, in 94 here. So the world was slightly different then. And we'd also come out of 15 years of hardcore civil war. And so there were tens of thousands of serving white Rhodesian soldiers. There were thousands upon thousands of white policemen, civil servants, across the entire fabric of governance, through to parliamentarians. So the entire structure of government and the entire structure of the country was very quickly flipped on its head, and so we had many thousands. I correct me, Google will help us, Grok will help us, but many people, as many perhaps as 100,000 people left the country. And you're
Mm,
talking about at our peak, there were perhaps 500,000 white Rhodesians. So there was a lot of panic. The older folk were extremely worried about Afro nationalists taking over. So there was an awkwardness to that for sure. And at that time we called it taking the gap, or the chicken run. But we also had South Africa down south as a conduit, a place to go to. That road south through Bite Bridge into Musina was an option that many people took. But
mm. And many people went back to
sad to
England.
say, the majority. Sorry.
And many people went back to England as well.
Yes, all over the world, actually. There were quite a lot of Rhodesians that had dual citizenship or Rhodesian British ancestry. So a lot of folks went there, Australia to New Zealand, Canada, the US. People really did bombshell at that time. But having said that, a hell of a lot of people stayed behind. And
And why did
and
you
yes,
and your family stay behind, Rory?
my dad was just a really positive guy. He saw opportunity in the future. The initial period after Mugabe took over was actually, to answer your original question, a honeymoon type period. So there wasn't any immediate retribution. All the talk was about reconciliation, about coming together, about forgiving the atrocities of on both sides, about uh, building a rainbow nation, and a lot of people bought into that. And then also in real terms, on the ground, it was extremely peaceful and very free. You can imagine. Well,
Mm,
it's hard to imagine, but try to imagine 15 years of intense civil war, to the point that thousands of people are dying. There are atrocities going on across the nation. Everybody is impacted by it. Nowhere that you go is without guns, bullets, and the threat of landmines, rocket attacks, or ambush. And then immediately, almost like you flick a switch, to peace. And so that peace actually was a general peace that the entire nation felt. And um, and that was obviously a gigantic release for the people of the country. And that led then into a period of perhaps 4 to 5 years of a real sort of abundance. People were sort of pinching themselves and saying, "Jeepers, everything is working
it's
out.
not that bad.
Wow, it's not
That
that
sounds
bad."
almost exactly like South Africa, but I think the honeymoon period lasted quite a lot longer in South Africa than it did in Rhodesia, because I mean, there are still people here in South Africa, almost 30 years after the ANC took over, that's still sort of trying to clinch and hold on to that honeymoon period. But I think that's a demographics issue. It's just because there are so many more white people in South Africa that were in Rhodesia, and the Rhodesians were much easier to just overrun. So tell me, we talked about 1985, and then you said there was about a 5 year period where it was sort of a honeymoon period where everyone thought, okay, it's not going to be that bad. Everything's going to be okay. We can still flourish, and so on and so forth. When did you guys start to realize during this honeymoon period that this isn't going to be like that? It really is going to become really bad under Robert Mugabe. What were the first signs that things are going to go badly for white Rhodesians?
Well, the first signs were actually what happened to black Rhodesians or black Zimbabweans at that stage, because in the early 80s, from about 82 onwards, 83, the Mugabe elite um, took revenge on the Matebele people, who were a offshoot of the Zulu from King Shaka's time, eventually Mzilikatsi, Dingaan, and then Lobengula, the last chief of the
Maybe you
Matebele,
should
who
start from the beginning there and explain the Shona and the Matabele tribes in Zimbabwe first before you go on.
I suppose that's a good idea, actually, because there's a hell of a lot of googling to do to try and unpack that for
Hmm.
your subscribers and for those watching. Yeah, so Shaka Zulu, the famous stroke infamous Zulu king, he had splinter groups, um, you know, which broke off from his kingdom in the late 1700s, early to mid 1800s. And these offshoots and break-offs of the Zulu nation fled Shaka's violence and his genocidal tendencies, and ran away to form their own state or their own kingdom. And the Matabele, which came directly out of the Zulu, actually spent many, many years on the run seeking a homeland. In fact, they came across the Boers in the mid 1800s and were routed in the Free State Northwest of modern South Africa, and they eventually fled through Botswana and settled in southern Zimbabwe. And the capital of southern Zimbabwe today is a town or a city called Bulawayo, and or Bulawayo in the English accent. And Lobengula settled there, and that was his kraal, or the seat of his kingdom, Bulawayo. And yeah, it's against that backdrop that we are discussing that part of history. So
So there was
during
centuries old conflict between the Matabeles and then the Shonas who were in Zimbabwe before the Matabeles fled there from Shaka Zulu's violence.
Absolutely. Now, when the Matabele finally settled at Bulawayo, they were a well trained, well organized, typical Nguni grouping with a military organized through Shaka's impi structures. And as a result, when they got into what is today's modern Zimbabwe, they were completely dominant, and ended up by the 1870s, 1880s, controlling a swathe of land from what is Victoria Falls on the Zambezi River in the northwest, right down almost to where the Kruger National Park is today. And
Hmm.
they encircled almost the entire territory of what is modern day Zimbabwe. And they managed to completely subjugate and defeat the Shona speaking clans. And so you can imagine they decimated them. They took
Hmm.
their women and children and assimilated them into the tribe. They raided them currently, consistently, of all their grains and produce. The Shona were really on the back foot. And in fact, There are some statistics that say there were only 60,000 or so Shona speakers by 1890 when my forefathers went into what is today Zimbabwe. Then
And
during
it's
the Civil
important
War,
that Mugabe was a Shona himself. So you said he was first taking revenge on the Matabele people for basically conquering them 100 years ago. And then after that, he started taking revenge on the white Rhodesian after the revenge on the Matabeles were done.
without a doubt. So during the Civil War, we had a thing called Zanla and another called Zipra. Zanla was the Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army, and that was Mugabe's Shona-speaking grouping, and they were backed largely by China. And then you had ZIPRA, the Zimbabwe Independent People's Revolutionary Army, and that was under a guy called Joshua Nkomo, who was the Matabele speaker's leader, political leader in those days. And they were backed largely by Russia. They fought out of Zambia and Botswana from the west into Zimbabwe or Rhodesia, and the Shona speaking groups under Zanla incurred raided Zimbabwe or Rhodesia from the Mozambican side. And so after the war, they obviously did not see eye to eye. They had a common enemy in defeating Smith and my people. But once that obstacle was out of the way, it was oil and water between them. And so Mugabe in the early 80s committed a genocide with a North Korean trained group of people called the Fifth Brigade under an awful man called Terence Shiri. And they killed 30, 40,000 Madebele people and buried them in mass graves and threw them down mine shafts and did unspeakable things in a genocide that has largely been overlooked and discounted by not just the West, but by everybody, and is hardly ever spoken about. But it
Mhm.
was a terrible time, and
How
we,
many
as
Matabeles
Rhodesians,
were killed by Mugabe during that time?
30,000, Willem.
30,000. That's a lot.
30, it's a lot of people, man. It's a rugby stadium, a football stadium full of people dead, but not just humanely. Not can you say humanely shot? But they did the most uncouth and terrible things. They would go to a village and create a what they call a pungwe, which is an all night celebration, and they would force the Matabele villagers to dig a mass grave, and then they would put the men into the mass grave, and then assassinate them, shoot them, then make their children and wives bury them, and then dance for the whole night on top of that grave where they had just buried their own fathers and husbands, singing praise songs to Mugabe. So it was deeply callous. But they hid it because, remember, it's the days before internet. There was a very, very strong military capacity, and they closed off huge swathes of the country. So we didn't really see it. But to get back to your original question, so we can move on, there was actually that was the time that in the early to mid 80s that we realized, wow, this is brutal stuff, and if that can happen, what next? And then, of course, it went into the 90s where. Mugabe had a challenge on him by his own war veterans from Zanla, and they hadn't got any benefit, had been given anything. And so they threatened to march on State House and unseat him. And so he basically emptied the Reserve Bank coffers and bankrupted the country overnight, and simultaneously sent the Zimbabwean army into Congo to fight for Laurent Kabila, the eventual winner of a civil war there, overthrowing a long term dictator. And so those few events up until the early 90s basically began the whole unraveling of the country as we knew it.
Okay, so after Mugabe took over, he had a few years when he took revenge on the Matabele people for, hundreds of years of conquering by the Matabeles against the Shonas. As for the guys who just joined, so Mugabe was a Shona. And after he committed this genocide on the Matabele people, he switched his fury to sorry about that, to the white Rhodesian population. When did this start, and when did the white population in Zimbabwe really came to the realization that they are the next target of Mugabe's fury?
So, just a little context then, historically, in terms of a timeline. So, so when these war veterans pressurized Mugabe, it was the first show of dissent against him. And that was something that he'd never foreseen happen. And the more and more he looted and emptied the state coffers to appease his people, so the inflation and cost of living and standard of service delivery and education and hospitals and the entire structure of the country began to break down. And because of that, of course, uh, a large percentage of the population started to really think negatively of him, and there were whisperings, and there were the rising up now of, for the first time, real opposition politically, and that was what brought on uh, the um, the move towards the war against the white farmer and the confiscation of our land. And it is a typical uh, Afro revolutionary manual 101, chapter 1, verse 1. Um, uh, Talk about the land, confiscate the land, give it to the people, stay in power thereby. And so it was in the early to mid 90s that we started to have a lot of conversations in the public space about what to do with the fact that us colonial settlers still had all the land, very, very much mirroring what the conversation is with the revolutionary ANC and EFF in South Africa today. And so it became apparent that that was, well, it was a trigger for a lot of us. And then, of course, those of us who were farmers and from farming stock were directly involved in conversations with the government, trying to find solutions to uh, to mitigate having to, destroy agriculture, destroy the economy, and seize all the land, where the commercial farmers and commercial farmers union placed hundreds of opportunities and potential solutions uh, at Mugabe's desk, mentorship programs, sharing land, whatever it might be, and to no avail. And then, of course, in the late 90s, it really, really got hot to the point that in 2000, the land invasions began. And yeah, Zimbabwe
So
was therefore way to a basket case.
so we sort of painted a big picture now of the political climate and what happened, and the chronological the how things happen, and during which times. But I want to move the conversation back to you personally. So we talked a little bit about how you grew up in Rhodesia and what a great place it was and how safe it was, and then how things became unsafe with the terrorist attacks from Mugabe, from the Zipra guys and the Zanla guys, and so on and so forth. And then we talked a little bit about that honeymoon period in Zimbabwe when everyone thought everything was going to be okay. And then we discussed the genocide and of the Matabele people, and then Mugabe turned his fury onto the white farmers, and I think everyone watching this knows basically what happened during that time with all the land seizures, and basically almost every single white farmer in that country having all of his property taken away without compensation. But if we move back to you personally, Rory, so during that honeymoon period, you grew up, you finished school, and what did you do during that time, and what were you busy doing when the heat got turned up against white people in Rhodesia? I mean in
So,
Zimbabwe, sorry, not Rhodesia.
well, now we are in Zimbabwe. Yeah, so I finished school in the early 80s and bumbled around as young boys do, trying to find my fortune. I didn't actually matriculate. I was too naughty, and I got involved in all sorts of teenage nonsense. But I eventually went back to my roots and began doing a farming apprenticeship. um, I first ran a little multi-production, what do you call it? A sort of a market garden, fruit and vegetable farm, and then I graduated on until I managed one of the biggest fruit growing operations in Zimbabwe, an aptly named estate called Britannia Estates. And so I managed that, where my daughter was born there in 87. And yeah, I kept with farming and was mostly on the land. Later on, I went into tourism and conservation. My family have always been into wildlife conservation. My uncle at the time, all the way to the year 2001, was the chief warden of Zimbabwe's national parks. So we grew up in the national parks. And so I eventually had interest in tourism, conservation, guiding, hunting, all that sort of stuff. And then I spent a decade in East Africa, guiding people to the pygmies, the mountain gorillas, the lowland gorillas, climbing the great mountains of East Africa, the Nile River, Uganda, Ethiopia. So I spent a lot of time traveling. Eventually, when I came back to Zim, I got back into agriculture. Um, and yeah, my last dance in Zimbabwe was farming just outside Harare, uh, all the way in 2010. That farm was eventually made non-viable by the comrades. So yeah, mostly conservation, outdoors, tourism, and agriculture.
Okay, so
Um, leave me for.
let's switch to the time when the land invasion started happening. Were you then managing Britannia Estates, or during what part of your career was this?
So at the time, actually, I had quite a solid business, little business empire. So, apart from a bit of farming, I also had interests in hardware shops and distribution, electrical and hardware. I had a tourism business up at Lake Kariba in the Zambezi Valley. So I had, yeah, a lot going on at that stage. I was doing extremely well. I was married, and we were living well in the capital city. And it was that at that stage I actually went through quite a messy divorce, and I got custody of my single son, my only son. And as a result of that, I decided, with the volatility in the country, because the land grabs were starting in earnest, and we were running support for farmers in areas under attack. I can go through that in some detail just now, but because I was a single dad now to a 2-year-old boy, I decided to take him to the safest place I knew, which was Kariba town on Lake Kariba, and I had a beautiful home there. So during the height of it, we spent that in Kariba. And remember that during the land invasions, what they call Hondo Yeminda, the war on land or the war for land, that's what they called it, Hondo Yeminda or the Jambanja. During that time, the rural areas, which were, our common ground for 90 years, 90 whatever year, 95 years, or nearly 100 years by that stage, were off limits to us. And so white people were immediately just excluded from the rural areas, and you had to make do and find a way or find somewhere to be. And so suddenly the cities and towns were full of farmers and farmers' families who had, been forcibly and immediately, ejected off their farms. Remember, Willem, they don't come and say, "Oh, here's a little paper. You got 6 months to wind up." It was, "You leaving now,"
Yes.
and followed
Tell
by
me a bit
violence.
more about what you mentioned about when you were running support for all these farmers that were under attack. What was the situation like then, and how did you guys try to support the other farmers in the area that were under attack by the government?
So let me give you an idea of how Zimbabwe looked at that time. So you had these farming districts, very rural, very simple, basic infrastructure, small rural strip roads, very small little towns with a farmers cooperative in it, and a police station, and then basically nothing else. And so what was happening was that you would find that we would get a report that, about 600 so-called war veterans or state operatives had been trucked into a particular area. And, all of us had friends or family in those areas. And so we would get in our pickup trucks and race out there with supplies, food, weapons, uh, to go and see if we could save them, assist them, get them safely out of the areas that were under attack. And those times were extremely hair raising because you had random roadblocks, total civil disorder, fires burning, bridges occupied by groups of revolutionaries, if you like, um, homesteads being burnt down, people dying, shootouts, people getting shot, people getting stoned, workers being abused, workers' homes being burnt down to the ground, thievery. They would come to your home in a police or army truck. So it was blatant. 100 people on the back of a 10-ton truck, and they'd be dumped there, and they would ransack your home while you stood on the lawn with your children, and they will pull your earthly belongings out and throw them in the garden, stomp them, urinate all over your family photographs, burn the house down, beat people up, beat up or kill the farm workers, because the black farm workers were bunched up as whites, traitors and sellouts to the whites. And so it was very violent, and we were in those areas just trying to troubleshoot and counter the offensive of Mugabe's people by trying to help and save those that were under attack. And it was a relentless, dangerous, difficult, and occasionally people in our sort of rescue groups themselves didn't make it out. So yeah, that was it. Very, very hardcore, sometimes lasting 3 4 days of no sleep, and just back roads and cutting fences and 4x4ing, trying to in get behind the lines and get people out and get possessions away and try and get tractors out and try and take some infrastructure and save what we could of people's lives as this mass marauded across the landscape, almost in a sort of uh, scorched earth type way, leaving behind it roadblocks and burning infrastructure and uh, unruly youths with pungas and spears and guns. So true nightmare type scenario, Willem. The heart of darkness come alive.
It's very interesting to me. I never thought about it like that. It wasn't that they want to take a fully run commercial farm and give it to some black person. As you said, they just came there and tried to destroy everything. And on top of that, I mean, as you said, urinating on their family photos. It was completely hate driven. It wasn't financially or economically driven. That they just wanted your stuff. They wanted to destroy your entire life.
That's right. It was vengeance, hate, and vengeance, and it's identical to Malema. MK and the South
Mm.
African context today, where you have these insane propagandized uh, uh, Afro-nationalistic, racist blacks who just talk to you as if you are but a impediment to a journey that uh, is written in stone, that you will be walked over, killed, and we're going to take your things. There was absolutely no interest in saving anything. In fact, I would say a huge percentage of the actual farmers, our farm homesteads, which we built on the land when it was wilderness, 90% of those are not lived in, or many of them are not lived in. Those are ransacked. The window frames and doors are gone, and the roof and the structures are gone. It's looted. Everything is taken away from it. It's nothing anymore, and it's characterized by today, I mean, just complete loss. So huge established citrus orchards, massive plantations. It made absolutely no, they had no interest in taking over a viable transition sort of into agriculture for themselves. It was pure hate and hate rhetoric fed to the people, and it was the desperate last roll of the dice for Mugabe, of course. And the same thing, if it happened in South Africa, that it would be for the ANC. Roll that land dice, uh, hit the go button on taking people's farms in your country, and that is the end of your country. But
It's
what is that
amazing.
saying? Yeah.
It's just astonishing. I mean, it's very clear from the way that you describe this that they had absolutely no intention of becoming farmers or getting the land back so that they can work the land. Their only intention was to destroy everything that the Rhodesians had built. Tell me, Rory. So you keep referring to South Africa, Julius Malema, MK Party, and so on and so forth. You yourself live in South Africa right now. When you look at the situation here and you look at the political rhetoric by these very popular politicians, do you get flashbacks of what happened in Zimbabwe when you were a farmer there, and you become afraid that the same thing might be happening in South Africa in the future? Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question, Willem. Yo, that's a hard one because yes, the answer is yes, yes, and obviously yes. There are so many similarities that it is deja vu, uh, real, not a dream. The language is identical. The entire structure is identical. Um, I was chatting to Roman Kabanak last week on one of his shows he's doing now, and I said to him, it's so bizarre that I mean, so I'm 60 years old now, but when I was 30 years old, I was listening to the exact words with the fist clenched and the beret on being spoken into the minds of Zimbabwean black people, the majority in Zimbabwe, preconditioning them to genocide or to the takeover of the country through violent means. And today it's identical. There is not a single thing in this Mugabe's playbook. Was Ramaphosa not recently, uh, uh, praising the Zimbabwean president for what they did? So absolutely, I do. I used to get extremely paranoid about it, particularly uh, earlier on in my life in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, after I came down from Zim. But today I have a different opinion about that. Um, I'm staunch, and I'm a stoic, and I'm never ever going to give up my ground ever again. We did it
Never
once,
again.
never again, never ever again. I will die on my stoop, no problem, and with a happy face, because that is a much greater future than what happened to what was an incredibly special country, Zimbabwe. So, yeah, Willem, I do definitely have flashbacks of Zimbabwe, but the situation in South Africa is not the same. Um,
Mm.
35,000 boertjies on farms with all of the backup and the structures and the safety features and units that we've got, and the never say die attitude of these people and our people now that I have adopted this country as my home. I see a completely different type of scenario, nothing like the Zimbabwean one. They will be able to, they will try. I think certain areas of South Africa will fall. Limpopo will not have much of a chance. I don't think. And Mpumalanga, certain areas just won't exist, and maybe in KZN. But there will be pockets of resistance, and I don't think the government has the resource or the practical fundamentals to carry it out. They don't have the trucks. They don't have the coordination potential. The police are outnumbered by private security by 10 to 1. It's a different kettle of fish. But Zimbabwe was so easy, because it was
Mm,
a trusting, open, growing society. It was a society filled with hope and hard work that had come 20 years through a civil war and into this period of growth, and where everyone had bought into the
mm.
let's get together and do it narrative, and so that was a different story. But I don't think South Africa is going to go that way. They may try, but I think there'll be a different outcome.
So, would you say then that one of the main reasons why the Rhodesians or later the white Zimbabweans were so easy to basically just decimate in Zimbabwe was because of their liberal, egalitarian, open, empathetic way of looking at life, and the thought that they had that they could build this togetherness in the nation with the different black tribes in Rhodesia. And you think the Afrikaner here in South Africa, because he's a little bit different than that, might be its saving grace, or am I reading you wrong?
The only thing that I would change about your statement is that we were not liberal. We were realists, but there were only 4,000 of us, and we were spread across a largely super rural,
Mm,
um, geographic area, and easily contained with few roads, and so logistically the government was able to attack us and attack us unannounced. And once it started, it snowballed. Um, People were into making money and growing Zimbabwe. So there was definitely two things happened. One, I blame the white farmers to some extent, uh, but strangely for building the opposition and supporting the opposition. When you've got a strong man, a murderous genocidal dictator as your leader, don't think you're clever enough to go and back some other black dude with some money and try get him into power because he's going to be fucking, more peaceful.
no, I
So that
hear
happened.
exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, there's
Okay,
people in
Rory,
South
let's
Africa.
we
Go
are
on.
we are talking so long now. We've been busy for 50 minutes now, but I want to get
Shit.
back to your story. You said that when you had your 2-year-old son, you were recently divorced. You decided to move out of Harare, the capital city, and move to a safer haven, which is Kariba. Let's tell us about Kariba. Why was it a safer haven? For white people inside the greater turmoil that was going on in South Zimbabwe, and what happened there in Kariba, because that's actually one of the main reasons why I wanted to do this stream, as to speaking about the fact that you were jailed or imprisoned by Robert Mugabe's forces, because you were standing
Yeah.
up for your community there. Tell us what happened there. I think
Yeah.
that's going to be one of the most interesting parts of this video.
Okay, good. How are we doing for time?
No, no, we can go on as long as you all have
Okay.
time. I have no problem with going on. The conversation is extremely interesting, and I think it's also very It's something that people should hear. People should have a more in-depth understanding of what happened in Rhodesia and then later in Zimbabwe. So I
Yeah.
don't think we should constrain this video to a certain time. Yeah,
Okay.
I just think
Yeah.
we I would like to hear the story from you now.
Okay. Well, let's get to that then. All right. So it's under the basic structure that we've laid out so far in this conversation that the farms are being looted or have largely been looted. Most of the farmers are now off the land. There's a air of utter confusion, fear, despondency, hyperinflation. People are at crossroads everywhere. Hunger, starvation uh, in rural areas, um, food security gone. Nobody basically has uh, the past that they knew overnight. There's no more farms, no more farmers, no more food. So um, in Kariba, we developed a town there by building a dam wall there at the Kariba Gorge, hence the name Kariba, the lake, and it was largely a tourist town and a blue collar town, commercial fishing on the lake. It's a huge lake, 400 kilometers long, 80 kilometers wide. So it has big commercial fishing fleets on it, houseboats. It's surrounded by wildlife reserves and national parks, and so it's a world famous tourist and wildlife destination. I had a houseboat on the lake, and I took my son up there to live because it had no farms, and because there was no commercial agriculture, there was none of the typical problems that the rest of the country were facing, especially in the rural areas. So we went there because of that, and a lot of the farmers from around Zimbabwe had holiday homes there, or bought or hired holiday homes in the town. And so it was actually chock a block full of farmers who had been attacked and expropriated. And it was really a landing pad for a lot of us to try and get somewhere sane and peaceful for long enough to start to reassemble our lives. And that is what I took my little son to, is because it was safe. And it was actually quite an amazing period. The community was so strong because of it that that actually we became a real sort of standout town. We had no reason for politics there. The money and the influx of so many people changed the sort of economic, socioeconomic structure a little bit. There were quite a lot of jobs. People started to develop other businesses after farming. We went into processing, engineering, building boats, fishing, tourism, building homes. So there was a bit of a construction boom. It was very much isolated around this little town, but because of that, there were a few thousand people, white people, living in the town at the time, and yes, so it was very very nice. In a time of madness, I would say it was a place of refuge for us, and I was able to look after my little boy amongst friends and family there, in what was a relatively normal environment. Um, but of course, all of us were staunch anti Mugabe, anti very much what had happened to us, what had happened to our farms and to our lives, and the destruction of our culture and people and livelihoods. And as a result, there was always an undercurrent of resistance against Mugabe, and that, of course, was shared by most of the black folks that lived there, because of they could see the rest of the country falling apart, and they had this little unit of displaced farmers who were investing, giving jobs, and basically keeping things afloat in a time that most of the country was really suffering deeply. And it was against that backdrop that Mugabe's Central Intelligence Organization arranged a hit on our town in order to scare uh, the minorities into conforming to his rule, and that started with me. Um, at the time, yes, I was a single dad. My boy was 4. He's just walked in, standing here now. He's now 27. Um, and I was a good guy. I mean, I sponsored the Kariba Town Football Club. I paid for all their boots and socks and uniforms. Um, I gave a lot of money to the Catholic orphanage, and bought food and gave cash to look after orphan children. I created a lot of jobs. I was vocally anti Mugabe. My my very good friend Roy Bennett, a famous opposition MP who took Mugabe on by the horns, and eventually paid a hard price for it. I spent a couple of months in jail. He spent a year in hard labor. Um, and uh, and there was a famous moment where Roy Bennett was in the Zimbabwean parliament, and a ZANU PF dog called Patrick Chinamasa attacked him, verbally calling his parents and ancestors dogs and pigs and the like. And Roy Bennett got up and actually clapped him in parliament. And for that, he spent a year in prison. But yes, so I was a vocal, outspoken person. Roy had come to Kariba to speak to me about being part of the resistance, and part of the resistance I was. And as a result of that, uh, I was attacked, Willem, and that was the beginning of a really tragic and difficult time in my life, which we can go into detail with now.
Okay, so tell me a bit about that. So there was a sort of a resistance and sort of freedom of speech, you can almost say, in the sense that people were speaking out against Mugabe, but then the hammer really came down on the guys that were speaking out. So who was the first to be hit because of something that he said? And just before you get to answering that, I want to point out I recently made a video called Rhodesia's White Liberals, and I spoke there about Sir Garfield Todd, and his daughter actually started speaking out against the genocide of the Matabele people. So Mugabe had her kidnapped and then raped and everything, and then she came out afterwards and said, no, she's just so grateful that her rapist didn't kill her. But I mean, she's a liberal. But what about the more conservative guys that started speaking out? What happened to them, and what happened to you specifically?
Willem, people are brave until they take a bullet. You're very, what do they say in fighting? It's all fun and games until someone loses an eye. And then all of a sudden that bravado disappears, and people become extremely introverted, insular, and defensive. And that's a natural habit of the human condition, is to step back from that position and go into a lager to ensure your safety. Whereas I was different. I was just absolutely outspoken all the time. I never really went into my shell. It was, if I was my staff, they got the lecture about how bad Mugabe was. The police, anyone that knew me, knew that I was rampantly, vehemently against this awful dictatorship that had was in the process of ruining our country. And um, and so there were quite a few attacks on individual people, but you must remember, just one last sort of encapsulated thought there. The land invasions were so extreme, Willem, so quick, so extreme, so violent, and so unsettling that it broke the people, you know. It totally broke the people. Can you imagine? You're recently married, you're 33 years old, you got two little kids at junior school, you're a farm manager, you've built a home, and then the next thing is you're trying to get an Irish passport because your grandmother was on one side of your family was Irish, and 6 months later you're in a little row house in Cork, and you got to look for a job. So people were totally shattered, the poor
Mhm.
buggers, whereas I was probably just more used to trauma and remained vehemently aggressive. But having said that, I countered that with a genuineness in my character and a generosity of spirit and also a totally non-racial vibe. I'm a Shona speaker, Dinutaora Shona Goandiza. So I speak the languages, and my family come there from huge heritage. So, I really believed, felt, and still do understand that that country and that history belongs to me. And how dare you try and take it away from me? you know my granddaddy built this place. You know what I mean? and uh,
Yeah.
and so that was the foundation of which my resistance to Mugabe was built on. But then one Sunday morning, sitting at my home, a very pleasant place on top of a little hill overlooking Lake Kariba, we were having a breakfast. I had a fantastic housekeeper called Kazembe. He was best part of 70 years old, and he was just the most wonderful old man. He loved me and my son, and he used to love making us Sunday breakfasts. It was his swan song of the week, and he would present it on the balcony, and we would sit and have a beautiful colonial time of it, having a beautiful prepared breakfast from Kazembe. And I was there with a friend who was visiting, an ex-Rhodesian soldier. They've written some books about him. I won't mention his name today. I have in the past and thought against it again. But let's call him Dave. I was there with Dave and my son Dan, and we were sitting, chilling, watching the lake, having this beautiful breakfast when the rattle of old four-wheel drive Land Rovers could be heard coming up the dirt track up the mountain to my house, which was quite an unusual sound at that time of day, and they were speeding too. And as a result, I got up and walked towards through the house from the front veranda overlooking the lake, through the house to the back door. And as I opened it, there were 13 armed agents of the state with AK-47s, uh, who simply barged into my house with rifle butts and began to ransack my home. Uh, yeah, and that is where the juice, the story starts to squeeze some juice, Philip. So so what happened was they immediately bound me in physical actual chains, not a handcuff. They chained my wrists in the garden around a tree, and made me stand there. They completely ignored Kazembe, my old housekeeper, and my son, and they took my friend David outside and held him at gunpoint. And then they ransacked my home. They took documents. They took all of my rifles and handguns. They took my computers, laptop and desktop. They took all of my files and business records. They took hard drives and bundled those into these Land Rovers, and then literally undid my chain from this tree, chained my elbows behind me, my hands in front of me, my wrists to my feet, which were bound together by chain. And they hobbled me off and threw me in the back of a Land Rover and put a sack over my body, the top of my body, and made me lie in the foot in the bed of the back of the Land Rover while they sat in there with their feet on me and their gun butts on me. And that was the manner that Dave and I were escorted out of my home. We were taken to the local police station, and by the time they had finished their raid, it must have been about 12 in midday when we got to the local police station. They took us into a holding cell and locked Dave and I in there together. The two of us were both, uh, you know, trained guys, used to trauma, used to dealing with things on the fly, experienced in gunfighting, if you like, and we knew that we were in real trouble. But at around 9 p.m. that evening, they came and unlocked a cell and took David out, and I never saw him again. At about midnight, they came to the cell, unlocked it, put a sack over me, and dragged me out to a vehicle, again thrown in the back. Remember, I was wearing a t shirt and a pair of shorts, no underwear, no footwear, no possessions whatsoever. They threw me in the back of a vehicle and then we drove. Now, there's only one road in and one road out of that town. So I knew by the road where we were. And there's only one turning at the end of that road. You can either go left to Zambia or right to Harare. And so I knew where they were driving me in my mind. Um, I wasn't really so much abused on that drive. It was cold. It was just before Easter. Um, I was a bit shivery, a bit cold, a bit beaten. I'd been rifle butted quite a few times, so I had a thick lip and some bruises and scratches, but I was relatively intact. Um, at about 2 a.m. in the morning, we stopped and I was pulled out, thrown on the floor, and physically dragged to my feet and then forced to hobble uh, towards, I could see through the sack quite well, actually, an old Hessian dusty sack. I could see we were going towards an official building, and then looking through the opening of the sack, I could see I was sort of in a hospital or a police station or a school or some sort of government thing, and then I could hear what they were saying, and I realized I was at a police station. I was then taken straight through the charge office, out the back, and marched through the compound of that marched through the buildings of that compound, the unshackling of gates, the unlocking of heavy doors, the sack pulled off of me, and then I was thrown literally into uh, utter darkness, and a gigantic door then slammed behind me. And as I fell and landed, I fell and landed in a liquid, and it splashed, and of course it stank because it was about 2 inches of human feces and urine,
Mm.
which had been bubbling out of a broken toilet hole, a squat toilet in there where the plumbing had been so backed up that the entire compound, every time they flushed or flushed a toilet, it surged and pushed back into that room. And so they threw me in there, and I fell onto my right hand side. And when I fell, I landed, and my hand and my arm was covered, but it was pitch black. I couldn't see a thing. I could hardly breathe. Not many people have spent time in human waste, but the methane and the gas that comes off it is so potent that it immediately shocks your olfactory system. Your eyes water. You can hardly breathe, and of course you can feel the slime. So without being able to see anything, I lay very still, hoping and waiting for eventually my eyes to adjust to the whatever light was coming in there. And then ultimately, after about 20 minutes, I could see where the door frame was, because under the door there was a gap of about 5 millimeters, and I could see light from outside under there. And so lying on my side, I scooted myself to the door so that I don't get myself rolled in this stuff any further than I was. And there was a funny little concrete ramp from in the room up to the door, and then the base of the door was here with that little gap. And I put my head next to the door, the base of the door, like this, and there was actually a very, very slight breeze of freshish air coming underneath the gap in the door. Willem, I lay there the entire night uh, until around 10 in the morning, uh, when they came and opened the door and told me to get up and come out. I got up and came out into a locked courtyard of security fence, roofed with fencing and razor wire, and there was a faucet, a tap in there, and I immediately walked to it and turned it on and began to rinse myself. I took my shirt off, I put my shirt in the tap, and I started washing myself. They said nothing, they just let me do it. Minutes later, I'm sent back in the room. Now, Willem, I spent 13 days in that room.
In the same room with the feces.
I spent 13 days in human feces under those men.
Well, that's an
No
absolutely
charge.
horrible story. I've been to
It make,
African prison myself, but I've never been in a room with feces, luckily, for 13 days. That sounds absolutely horrendous. How did you get out eventually?
that was just a start. That was just a start. Um, Nobody knew where I'd been taken. And they had this thing called the Emergency Powers Act, where under some presidential decree, Mugabe could, for the sake of state security, take you away. The CIO, the Central Intelligence Organization in Zimbabwe, had numerous places that they would take people and eliminate them or extremely torture them. And Karoi uh, jail, Karoi police station at the back, where I was in these old cells, was one such place. And as a result of that, it took quite a few days for anybody to locate where I was. But very fortunately, eventually, a wonderful human being called Michael Anthony Magunje, we called him. Mike came. He's a farmer that had lost his farm, but he was still staying in Karoi town. And people phoned him and asked him to go and check for me at the police station. He was a well known character in that town, being about 6'7" and 300 pounds. And the police allowed him to come to the back to see me. And that was after about 7 days. That was my first introduction to another person. I had not eaten for a week. I only drank water when I was let out randomly into the little cage in front of the room, where I could then quickly wash myself off and bathe as best I could, drink water. And when Michael came, oh, thank God for him. Being such a big man, he actually had his shirt on him. And I'm quite a big guy, but he's this big. And he said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And I said, "Listen, please, can I have your shirt? Because I can button the top button up and put it around my head and lie inside of it like a sleeping bag, because it was so bitterly cold at night in that urine and human feces." Eventually, after 13 days, they took me to the magistrate's court in Karoi, and they dragged me in there in exactly the same condition as I was, having come out of that 2-week ordeal in there, washed up only by the tap in the garden, and in the garden, in the courtyard. And I was immediately remanded in custody in Karoi prison, and I was sent to prison uh, at that point. Then I was chained and marched from the magistrate's court and booked into Karoi prison without charges. Um, and that then was the second phase of a very long and arduous uh, process that I went through. African prisons are notoriously bad, but Zimbabwean prisons at that time, during hyperinflation and food shortages, because of course that killed all the farming and all the farm produce. So prisons and hospitals were places you went to die if you couldn't look after yourself, if you didn't have any source of money or people coming to bring you things. You literally ate slop. And yeah, I was taken and hosed down, and I was given an old khaki short and shirt, no buttons, no drawstring. You had to hold the short up, and infested with lice. And then I was thrown into a holding cell with about 200 other guys, black guys, all black. I was the only white person, only European descendant person in there, um, in conditions that were beyond appalling. 200 people in a room, 40 foot by 20 foot, standing room only, unbelievable conditions. My right shoulder is still buggered because of that. You lie on concrete. You are forced to lie in one position on your side, head to toe, head to toe, head to toe, so that from around 7 p.m. at night till about 6, 7 in the morning, there is absolutely no movement whatsoever. You're lying on one of your arms, trapped with your head on the feet of another person as your pillow, and there is no rolling over. It was a place of absolute mayhem, suffering, and death in there. And I spent 6 weeks in that room in those conditions. Uh, when I was in that prison, the Central Intelligence guys really got to work on me. So after roll call in the mornings, occasionally I was shackled and taken on a long walk where they made an example of me because I was the only white man in that prison, the only white man in any sort of trouble, if you like, with ZANU-PF at the time. And they would walk me to the main road, which is basically the road from Zambia to the capital city, Harare, the highway, so to speak. It's just a 2-lane. The city, the little town of Karoi, sits on both sides of the road. A couple of small shops, a couple of garages. It was a time of hyperinflation, so there was poverty. And at 5, 6 in the morning, they would make me walk on the center line of the road from the top of the town, about 2 kilometers through the town, on my own, shackled in my prison garb, barefoot, and I would have to walk the entire length of the town on the white line with trucks and buses and cars, the whole town waking up, people setting up their market stalls. And quite often I was made to walk that gauntlet. And of course, I was the center of attention and I was mocked, had things thrown at me. I was jeered, and my captors walked not in the road with me, of course, but alongside, always chivying up the people to make an example of me, and then they would take me to what was a former little engineering company down the bottom of the town, and then I would spend the day there with them, where the CIO had taken over this engineering firm, which had closed its doors because of the farm invasions, and they used that as a torture center. And then I was thoroughly grilled day after day, week after week, for a month and a half, where I was accused of trying to overthrow a democratically elected government. I was accused of arms trafficking. I was accused of foreign currency externalization. I was accused of making pornography. I was accused of running businesses without a license. I was accused of 13 different charges eventually when I got to the magistrate's court. And, uh, and those were grueling days, chained by the wrist, chained by the elbow behind your back, chained from your wrists to your ankles, which are chained. And come hell, rain, water, sun, I was beaten by rifle butts, kicked, abused, slapped, punched, spat on, you name it, day after day for weeks, and then brought back to that prison cell and thrown in there. And that was how I spent those weeks. But because my friend Michael had come to visit me when I was still in the cesspit, he had alerted, obviously, family and friends, and there was a huge flurry of activity that I had no idea of going on in the background on my behalf, where people were raising funds to assist me legally and motivating and bringing to life all sorts of potentials to try and help me and free me from the hands of ZANU-PF. As a result of that, two fantastic black guys, Lawrence Chibwe and Zimbabwe Chimgwa, two amazing, brave black lawyers from the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, who were a donor funded organization. Often those lawyers were murdered as well for the work that they did trying to help people like me. But eventually, after 6 weeks, I got my time in front of the presiding magistrate, a ZANU-PF sycophant, a rigged court, and I was granted bail of $1 million, and my passport was taken from me, and I was given instruction that I had to report to the police station in my area every Friday morning and every Monday morning until such time as my trial was over. And I was then set free, and I walked out of that prison rather broken. I had kidney infection, liver infection, lung infection, ear infection. I had lice. I had my eyes were congealed closed. I had broken bones. I was malnourished. I had, you know, diarrhea. I'd lost many kilograms, and but I was at least out of that satanic place, and on my way home to see my little son again and to begin the next phase of that story. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that ZANU-PF do, that these African thug governments do, without batting an eyelid.
Well, Rory, I have absolutely no words. I've known you for almost a year now. We've had beers together. We had great times together, but this is the very first time I've heard this story. I know you told me you've been to jail in Zimbabwe because you were speaking out against the government, but I absolutely never knew that things were as bad as or for you as you just described. Yeah, I find it difficult to continue this conversation, but
Yeah,
because I'm just so touched by everything you went through, and yeah, it's just incredible.
yeah.
But tell us more. Tell us, after all of this happened, was this when you decided to come to South Africa and to be done with Zimbabwe? And has everything been good for you since?
So, Willem, so when I was let out, excuse me, like a baboon, I need to scratch my armpit here. Um, yeah, so they took my passport, Willem, and it was a further year and a half of trauma, drama, raids on my home. I see they say, what year did this take place? In the mid 2000s, early to mid 2000s. Um, so they took my passport, so I couldn't travel. And of course, I was followed, and I was, had eyes on me the whole time for a year and a half. And I had to go back to that magistrate's court month in, month out for a year and a half until eventually, Willem, the magistrate with a straight face looked at me and said, "Ah, Mr. Duncan, you are free to go. Case closed, charges dropped."
So the state dropped the charges. You didn't even finish your trial. They just
No,
absolutely abused you for multiple years, and then they just drop charges and tell you you're free to go now.
like that. Willem, I must tell you, please, a very happy ending to that story, because there are these little moments within that time in that prison, and I'll just briefly tell you, there was this terrible human being called Detective Sergeant Tenga, and he was one of the main torturers. And one day when I was down at that little engineering firm and they were being particularly cruel to me, I got hit in the mouth with a AK-47 butt, and I stood up. I jumped up, but I was chained. I jumped up and I said to them, "Fuck you, fuck you all, kill me now, but you can't." And you can imagine, I mean, weeks now, diseased, sick. I said, "You can't, you cowards, you can't, you won't." You won't. And one day I'm going to be free. I am going to be free. And I'm going to come back past through this little shit town of yours. And I'm going to see you at a roadblock. And you're still going to be a poor, useless, Zanupieth idiot. And I'm going to be traveling to eat meat and drink beer and bonk my girlfriends in the capital city. And Willem, you won't believe what happened. I arrive a year later. I'm back to full strength. I arrive a year later at the town outside the very same police station, and there is Detective Sergeant Tenga standing with another guy that was an equal torturer of mine. And they ran up to my bucky and said, "Ah, Mr. Duncan, my friend, how are you? Buy us beer." Willem, I bought them beer. I said immediately, "Hop in, let's go." We went to the Karoi Hotel, a little quiet place, just the barman, those two, and myself. And I made them so drunk, Willem, so drunk. We had this terrible drink called cola cane. We drank that. We drank beer. And just before the sun was setting, I said, "Hey, boys, it's time for me to go. We have to go." So I paid the bill and I walked out with them, Willem. And then I took Tenga and I looked him in his face and I said, "Yeah, Tenga, this is for those times." And I gave him a right hand across his face that knocked him completely out unconscious. And I hit the other one out cold as well. I fucked them both up in the car park and I put a $50 note in each of their top pockets. I actually had to pull the one out of the way so that I could reverse my truck, and I fucked off to Harare. And that is the last time I ever heard from those police.
Well, at least you forgave them.
Yeah, look, there's just no way you can carry the bitterness, the fear, the loathing, the anxiety with you if you're going to try and live somewhat of a normal life after that type of experience, Philip. It takes a
Mm.
hell of a lot of getting used to. And so, yeah, to answer the question, just to quickly skip into where we are now. So that was 205. a wonderful friend of mine, Colin, who owned a company called Tabard, the mosquito repellent thing in Joburg. He gave me a year in Joburg, and I went down, and he looked after me and my son. And after a year in Johannesburg working for Colin, I went to him and I said, I can't do this. I can't live in a place like this. It's driving me insane. So my son and I actually went to Zambia, and we rebuilt for 5 years. Please, can you do that elsewhere? Hello. My wife's feeding the puppy. Sorry, viewers, and
No
sorry, Willem.
problem.
Yeah. So
Does she know there's
so
1,000 people watching you now?
there's 1,000 people listening to my dog eat its breakfast. Sorry. But yeah, so so then I went to Zambia with Daniel, and and I did very well in Zambia. I got a farm going in the Zambezi Valley. I got a home and a business going again in hardware and supply. I I did pretty well in Zambia, and then in 2008 we had the, wait for it, the GNU, the Government of National Unity, which is where Mugabe was finally forced to bring the opposition into a government of national unity, and they adopted the United States dollar. And
Mm.
at that point, my radar went off, and I thought, "Ooh, opportunity to go make a big pile of US dollars back in Zimbabwe. Let's go." And so myself and the former captain of the Zimbabwe cricket team, Alistair Campbell, went into a farming project on a small holding not far outside of Harare. And we were doing flowers for export for Europe and vegetables for export to South Africa. We had greenhouses, and I ran that for a few years, got that up and going, became profitable, employed 155 people, and then it happened again.
You
They
didn't learn
came and,
from your mistakes.
yeah,
They took your farm again.
yes, and they took me again and threw me in prison again. And
Why
thank
did you
God.
go back, Rory?
Ah, Willem, just the complete anger, frustration of it all, just getting my own comeuppance somehow, proving myself wrong, proving myself a stoic, proving myself an idiot. But I went back, and I caught a whole bunch of guys stealing our borehole pumps, and me and my cousin tracked them to their village, arrested them, brought them to the police. Eventually, they told the cops that I'd beaten them. They came and arrested me. I stayed in a cell overnight at the Marlborough police station in the Harare city. By that stage, of course, lawyers were there first thing. I was freed. They apologized to me, but that was the end of that farming operation. And very soon after that, we closed it down. And it was then that I tried my hand at gold mining. I invested in quite a lot of equipment, pumps, drills, compressors, generators, and we went and lived out in a rural area. I got some land claims, and I took myself gold mining until immediately that I'd struck gold. They said no, whites are not to mine gold here, and
So for
that was,
three times you tried something and you made a success out of it, and then the Zimbabwean government just took it away from you. Told you,
just
sorry,
beat
white
us.
guys
And
aren't allowed. White guys aren't allowed to make any sort of success in this country.
that's
It's
a
against the
fact.
law.
Yes, that's true. And I was also equally anti the government at the time too. So probably my own worst enemy, but I'm proud of myself, and I'm proud that I never gave in. But then, yeah, we then my son was just now in the first year of senior school, and I needed to get him. He was a good, talented young boy, and I just didn't want him growing up in that mess of post Mugabe Zimbabwe, the Mnangagwa
Mm.
era, and the hash and mess that had become of that nation. And so, fortunately, I was a registered South African citizen. My son is the child of a South African woman, and we had South Africa as a refuge, and I'll be forever grateful to it and to the people that I've met along the way in South Africa who have welcomed me and made me feel a part of this nation. And it is one of the most wonderful and incredible and diverse, and not diverse in the stupid gay way, but it's one of the most wonderful countries in the world, South Africa. And I have the same fervor and the same passion to see this place succeed as I did fight for the freedom of Zimbabwe.
There's a very interesting question here from a super chat by Yadrian. By the way, I want to just thank all the guys that give super chats because you guys are really helping us keep this channel afloat and we really appreciate it. But Rory, this is a question. It says, do you think a multicultural democratic Zimbabwe with a small white minority could have worked and turned out a successful story if ZANU-PF simply had a different leader, someone other than Mugabe, in other words?
The answer has to be yes, because, but with the proviso that that person had to be a non-rabid Afro-nationalist communist, you know.
But
But
do you think the black population would have ever supported someone who was not a rabid black nationalist communist? Because that's all they support here in South Africa.
well, actually, that's what happened with the GNU. You know, very similar to South Africa. Morgan Tsvangirai, the leader of the opposition, who was also thoroughly beaten and imprisoned and tortured, along with Roy Bennett, my friend, a white politician of that time. They were pro West, pro economy, pro business, and the people were turning to them in droves. In fact, quite frankly, they they won the presidential election in 2007 or whatever it was, and it was our own Thabo Mbeki who used the what was his crazy phrase, uh, the quiet diplomacy, where we wouldn't highlight the human rights and political abuses of the time in Zimbabwe. But no, to answer that question, yes, but given the right person, and then given that the communists would actually hand over power. So the ultimate answer is no, because they never hand over power. But the technical answer, theoretically, yes. In terms of the emotion, the emotive desire of the population for a better life after 30, 40 years of a dwindling economy, unemployment, joblessness, hunger, you know, they would vote for a flying pig if it would just get them out of it.
Yeah, I hear you. Here's another very interesting super chat. Yellow tape measure. Thank you very much for the big super chat. Says, does Mr. Duncan recall the civilian Air Rhodesia Viscount Hunyani that was downed by a Stella 2 heat-seeking missile in 1978 and the subsequent barbaric murder by bayonet of the crash survivors by Nkomo Zipra forces?
Well, hell yes, of course. In fact, Willem, this bookshelf is full of that evidence. Uh, this book recalls every atrocity and every one of the major moments of that war. Yeah, it was not only that, there were two of those planes shot down. And it was awful. But you must remember that in the Rhodesian War, the communist terrorist revolutionaries did dastardly things, impaling little girls on fence posts, cutting the lips and ears off of a husband, forcing the wife to cook and eat them. The barbarity was extreme. Remember, we're talking about a time before the internet, a time that the Western liberals, the Kissingers and that ilk, had convinced the world that we were expendable as a country, as a culture, as a people, and there was just no reporting about it. People were against Rhodesia, as it were. So yeah, we remember it. You know, I often think about my life because I was born in 1966 and I'm 60 next birthday, and I've been um, for the first 14 years of my life under Ian Smith in Rhodesia during Civil War. And since then, since 1980 until now, I've been ruled by black African communists. And I'm still here. And I'm still interested in the future of this place and of our people who, with ox wagon and steam eventually, but by sheer grit and determination and skill and cultural sensibility, managed to develop the the most fantastic infrastructure, schools, roads, networks, rail, telegraph, communications, cities, universities. And if I could never leave, what would I have if I was in America? I would just be a person who had no culture, no nothing left of me. You know, here in
Hmm.
South Africa, I have my people. I am Van Niekerk, I am Venter, I am Dunkel, I'm Phil van Biljoen, I'm Talach, I'm Tatham, you know. This is my root, and I love being here, you know. So it's worth fighting for. It's worth staying. It's worth it, you know. And I think South Africa has a big chance of somehow uh, coming through this.
Well, Mark Maber salutes you, um, and so do I, Rory. It was an amazing chat. I think I've been researching with my team Rhodesia for the past couple of weeks quite thoroughly. We've produced, I don't know, 5, 6 videos on Rhodesia, different topics in Rhodesia. But what
I've
you
been
have
watching
given us
them.
here,
Fantastic.
thank you for that. But what you have given us here is it's just human. It's the experiences that you went through. It's something that you can never capture in a factual video or a factual documentary. And thank you for giving us your story here, Rory, because as I said, it was just incredible. It was horrible at the same time. It was horrendous, but it was just. Um, it's been a very long time since I've heard a story like this, or even watched somebody else's video like this on YouTube, and I'm just very thankful for being the one that could have hosted you, so that you could bring this story to the world. And I hope a lot of people watch this. I hope everyone that watches it now and watches it later shares this thing far and wide, and it goes far, so everyone can know what you went through. For the guys that just joined us now, I mean, go back and watch the entire video where Rory tells his story. It's just incredible. Thank you for being here, Rory, and thank you for everyone that's watching with us and that joined us here on YouTube.
Willem, I'm going to say this in closing. Um, you know, I have such respect for you. Uh, you know, you were that comment about your moustache makes you look older and more mature, but when you shave it off, you know you look like a youngster. But your mind, Willem, is one of the most stoic, most solid minds on the South African commentary. Your way of delivery, the calm, easy, factual manner in which you present yourself, the fact that you take on difficult subjects head on and are not ashamed or pushed back upon or put into your box ever, that you remain doing what you're doing, is a phenomenon to me, and I love it. You, along with very few others who have pioneered this space and become a voice for the voiceless, and a reminder that our culture is valid and real, and telling the truth about what happens in this part of the world, and not letting the world not letting our comrades escape just with their narrative. So I salute you too, and would not have done this with anyone else better. And I appreciate it. Thank you for the time, and hopefully we'll see you again, maybe with old
Oh,
Stefan when he
thank
visits
you for
again.
your time as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And thanks for all of you guys that had watched with us. As I said, I think this story needs to go out into the world everywhere. So be sure to like this video, share it. I really want as many people as possible to view this video because the story that Rory gave us was just incredible. Just in closing, I want to ask you guys if you are enjoying our work or if you find value with it, please consider becoming a paid member of the Willem Petzer group. By becoming a paid member, and there's no set price that you pay, you can give whatever you want. You support us being able to make these videos, these live streams, and also the short videos that we do on this channel, and pay the salaries of the team that do the research. And therefore, we are very thankful for our members because they are the ones that make it possible for me to pay the salaries of the researchers and the editors and everyone that makes this channel happen and that makes everything that we do here possible. Thank you all for watching this video. Consider becoming a subscriber. All you need to do is sign me up to the number, the WhatsApp number on the screen, and we will contact you and set up your membership. Goodbye, and God bless every single one of you.